Greetings, brothers and sisters. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Adnastana. Pleasure to be back with you here on Points of Light Radio and continuing this journey of light and knowledge. In today's segment of Points of Light Radio, we will be continuing our study of world leaders in fraternalism. Today, we're going to be going to Mexico. That's right, Mexico. I was shocked at the number of presidents who were in the craft. Near as I can tell, none of them were Oddfellows, none of them were REOB, nothing like that. But they were in the craft, very heavily involved, and I was kind of shocked at how factionalized even their things were, even with the craft, how they were, right? I mean, what they call the Yorkistas versus the Scottish Rite, so on. Kind of shocked about that. So let's move forward. Let's take a look at that and see if we can learn a little something. Trim your lamps, brothers and sisters. Follow me. Now, first of all, before I go forward, I am going to apologize, if I mispronounce some of these names and get some of the names wrong. I don't speak Spanish. My pronunciation is probably going to be bad, but I think it is important that we remember the history of fraternalism, particularly the craft in Mexico, right? Right from the very get-go, I saw some differences in where the craft arrived. Like in the case of Canada, United States, right, or even a lot of the European colonies, Freemasonry arrived in many cases with some of the first contingents of troops that arrived. That was not the case in Mexico, right? Prime example, Freemasonry arrived in Mexico via French immigrants in the late 18th century, but faced persecution from local inquisitions. The first documented lodge was the Arquitectura Moral, that lodge that was founded in 1806. And early key figures in the Mexican War of Independence, including Miguel Hidalgo, Ignacio Allende, and Jose Maria Morales, are believed to have been members of that lodge. Now, following Mexican independence, Freemasonry became more of a battleground for political ideology. The Scottish Rite was established in around 1810. Like I said, a lot of these dates, they're very, are very, people will question them, but, and the York Rite was established in roughly 1824 and we know this by U.S. Ambassador Joel Poinsett, right? Now, this tended to divide the political elite in Mexico. Now, some of the key leaders and influencers that arrived out of that around the 19th century were leaders that were Masons, and they included Guadalupe Victoria, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, and most notably Benito Juarez, right? And his liberal reforms between 1858 and 1859 drew heavily on the Masonic principles to reduce the powers of the Catholic Church. Now, here again, another split came about. The Mexican National Rite was created around the 1820s. Now, this focused on national unity and political reform, and also fostered ideals such as the freedom of speech, the separation of church and state, and public education. beyond the 20th century, Masonic influence continued through the Mexican Revolution and into the 20th century with presidents such as Francisco Madero, Plutarco Elias Calles, and Lázaro Cárdenas, that they were associated, shall we say, with that Masonic movement. Now, throughout its history in Mexico, Mexican Freemasonry has been closely tied to liberalism, secularism, and the construction of a modern Mexican state. But as you can see, and you will see going forward, my studies revealed, and you will see, like I said, going forward, that at least in Freemasonry's earlier years in Mexico, they were highly factionalized, right? And a lot less united, at least on the surface, right? Now, and this goes with, for instance, one of the revolutionary leaders and president, Vicente Guerrero, right? He belonged to the York Rite, which were known as the Yorkinos. Now, he was more like, this was more of a faction than an individual lodge. And Herrero used his political involvement in the Yorkinos as a platform to secure the Mexican presidency in 1828. See what I mean? They oftentimes use these little, whatever they could get out of it to move forward. Now I'm going to move forward here as well, and you'll see how in Mexican politics, especially, like I said, in its earlier years, these men were kind of using their, shall we say, the influence they were getting in there, or the ideals they got in there, for political influence. One thing you will notice going forward is that I may not list the presidents in order, but I do want to at least list them and their accomplishment, their lodges, and so on, as we go forward, because I do think it's the history of it that's important, right? Now, beginning with Guadalupe Victoria, he was Mexico's first president. Now, Mr. Victoria was associated with the York Rite, or Yorkinos Rite, of Freemasonry in Mexico. Now, this was more of a faction, as I said before, that was supported by U.S. Ambassador Joel Poinsett. He introduced it and supported it. He was also, and Victoria was also a member of the Great Legion of the Black Eagle, okay? This was a secret society with influence similar to the York Rite seen here, right? Right now, this Great Legion of the Black Eagle acted as a Masonic lodge and a political organization at the same time. See what I tell you, how these things mesh up in Mexico in those days, right? And the Great Legion of the Black Eagle had the aim of the liberation of the Americas, and is often considered one of Mexico's very first political parties. Mr. Victoria established diplomatic ties with major global powers. This included the United States of America and the United Kingdom. He also ratified international borders with the United States, right? Mr. Victoria founded the National Museum and heavily promoted public education. You'll see that moving forward with a lot of these presidents that I'm going to list here today. That the big thing was education. Now, President Valentin Gomez Farias served multiple terms in office between 1833 and 1847. He was also a prominent member of the Yorkinos Masonic lodges in Mexico. And Mr. Victoria utilized his connections within the Masonic lodges to promote the very first major liberal reforms in 1833. Right? Due to his high standing in the Grand Lodge of Mexico, which was later named after him. Moving on, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna was elected president 11 times between 1833 and 1855. See, some of the earlier presidents were really moving in and out of power quite often. Now, he served as a defining president of his era. Santa Anna is documented as a Scottish Rite Mason. See, these were often in conflict with each other. However, many Masonic bodies never officially acknowledged him as a member, leading some to call him a renegade Mason. Now, he played a key role in achieving Mexican independence, particularly by securing Veracruz in 1821. During his presidency between 1842 and 1844, he worked on urban renewal and supported the arts. Benito Juarez was president of Mexico from 1858 to 1872. Senor Juarez was initiated into La Logia Independencia No. 2 of the Mexican National Rite on January 15, 1847 in Mexico City. His initiation took place at the National Palace in Oaxaca, and he later adopted the symbolic name Guillermo Tell within the organization. Now, Masonic records indicate that Senor Juarez reached the 9th degree of the Scottish Rite by 1854, and by 1862 he was named a 33rd degree Freemason. Senor Juarez was highly devoted to his Masonic principles, and his name is frequently used in Mexican rituals today. That really says something about his involvement in it. Now, Mr. Juarez rose from an impoverished Zapotic background in Oaxaca, and he was the first and only full-blooded indigenous leader to ever hold the presidency of Mexico. As president from 1872, Mr. Juarez led a reformist government. He enacted laws that curtailed the power of the Catholic Church and the military, and promoted land redistribution and established civil liberties. Sebastian Lerdo de Tejada was president of Mexico from 1872 to 1876. While his membership is often identified more with the liberal Republican faction of Freemasonry rather than one specific lodge, right? His presidency occurred during a time when many political leaders were affiliated with Freemasonry, which was deeply involved in the creation of a liberal Mexican state. Right? Now, Mr. Tejada assumed the presidency following Benito Juarez's death, but later won a constitutional term. He maintained a strict, elitist liberal government focused on stability and economic progress. He incorporated laws of the reform into the Constitution on September 25th, 1873, and he formally separated the church and state. He also reestablished the Senate in 1874. Porfirio Diaz was president of Mexico for multiple terms between 1876 and 1911. Now, records suggest that his early Masonic career was connected to the lodge in Oaxaca. Right, Diaz was specifically linked to the Scottish Rite and the York Rite traditions. Right, he served as Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of the Federal Districts of Mexico City in 1883 and later led the Grand Dieta Simbolica or Grand Diet in 1890. He was recognized as the Sovereign Grand Commander ad vitam of the Supreme Council of Mexico. Senor Diaz transformed Mexico from a bankrupt, unstable nation into a modernized, centralized state. He oversaw the construction of over 12,000 miles of railway track, which helped create a national transportation network and improved logistics to boost trade. Senor Diaz brought stability to Mexico by ending civil wars and by centralizing power. Francisco I. Madero was leader during the Mexican Revolution and president of Mexico from 1911 to 1913. Senor Madero was associated with a number of Masonic lodges around Mexico. In 1911, Madero was initiated into the 33rd degree of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. Now, his commitment to democratic principles and social reform was in part attributed to his involvement within Freemasonry. Some of his contributions to Mexican society were the freeing of political prisoners. He abolished the death penalty and freed those who had been imprisoned by the previous regime. He lifted censorship on the media. He allowed trade unions to organize, and specifically the rail workers, and improved labor conditions within Mexico. Plutarco Elias Calais was president of Mexico from 1924 to 1928. He was believed to have joined a local lodge in Guaymas, Sonora, around 1910. Mr. Calais worked his way to the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite. Some of his contributions to Mexico included the creation of Mexico's National Bank in 1925. He implemented major public works programs, including the irrigation systems, roads, and dams. Right? He dramatically increased funding for rural schools and setting up regulations for schools in towns of over 500 inhabitants. Lázaro Cárdenas was president of Mexico from 1934 to 1940. Right? Now, although his parent lodge is unknown, what is known is that he attained the 32nd degree of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasons by 1929. Cárdenas facilitated the empowerment of workers by supporting the creation of major labor confederations and strengthening worker protections and rights. Emilio Portes Gil was president of Mexico from 1928 to 1930. While Portes Gil is listed as a member of Freemasonry, specific details about his particular lodge number, right, or the name of his lodge are not highlighted in general records. However, what is known that among some of his accomplishments as president was that he secretly negotiated an end to the violent civil war between the Mexican state and the Roman Catholic Church. He reopened places of worship and stabilized national unity. He also diffused a major university strike by convening Congress to pass legislation that granted autonomy to the National University of Mexico. Pascual Ortiz Rubio was president of Mexico from 1930 to 1932. He was a member of the Freemasons and a part of the ancient Arabic order of the Nobles of the Mystic Shrine, or the Shriners. That's interesting, right? And his administration pushed for, in its accomplishments, the expansion of federal highways and the extension of electricity into rural areas. Alberto L. Rodriguez was president of Mexico from 1932 to 1934. He was a member of the craft. In fact, Logia Masonico Alberto L. Rodriguez, number 44 in Baja California, is named after him. Among his accomplishments as president, he oversaw the amendment of the Constitution to strictly enforce the principle of no re-election for presidents and state governors. Moving on, Miguel Alemán Valdez was president of Mexico from 1946 to 1952. He was a member of the Antiquities Lodge number 9 under the Grand Lodge Val de Mexico. He is later demitted and transferred his membership to the Mexico Lodge number 35. Right? Among his accomplishments as president, he initiated major dam building and hydroelectric projects and completed the diversion of the Lerma River. This permanently solved Mexico City's severe water supply crisis. Adolfo López Mateos was president of Mexico from 1958 to 1964. He was a Freemason and initiated in 1945. So, Mateos belonged to the Gran Logia del Estado de Mexico and the historic Gran Logia Val de Mexico. He established the National Commission of Textbooks in 1959. This helped distribute millions of free mandatory books to primary students to combat illiteracy in Mexico. So, let's reflect for a while, shall we, on what we've learned. First of all, I want to get back to what I said earlier. How, and you've heard this in previous segments of Points of Light Radio, where we talked about, especially like when it came to, if you recall, when I covered the anti-Masonic party, how many felt that Freemasonry was playing too big a role in society. And if you recall, I said that, yeah, it may have influenced people's lodge connections, may have influenced how, whether or not people voted for that candidate. Like a candidate's lodge influence might have had helped him get elected. There's quite possible back in those days, right? So there's no doubt about it here. It's not a matter of might, it's a matter of it did. Freemasonry was influencing, from a historical standpoint, was influencing politics in Mexico during its earliest days. The difference being, though, that unlike in the States and in Britain and North America, places like that, the fact is the lodges themselves seem to be at odds. I mean, the Yorkinos versus the Scottish Rite, and of course the Mexican Rite, when that particular Rite of Freemasonry arrived in Mexico, suddenly you had all these three lodges not just influencing politics, but itself, but at odds with they really didn't seem to like each other. I'm shocked. However, it's interesting to see how a lot of that continues today. For instance, the Great Legion of the Black Eagle, that party is still around today, right? According to at least when I investigated here, it did appear to be around today, right? But what I did see, no matter what faction was in power, were many of the same principles you've heard me speak of in other segments on world leaders and fraternalism were still at play, right? Those principles of peace, in the case of, for instance, their first president, he established diplomatic ties with major powers, right, and ratified the international border with the United States. He wanted to put an end to any type of conflict with the United States so that he could get on with building Mexico itself. And that seems to be, like I said, a common theme among world leaders who are involved in fraternalism, is the idea of peace, as well as I said, even right back to the very first president, he founded the National Museum of Mexico and heavily promoted public education. And that carried over, if you notice, with most of his predecessors. I know that in Freemasonry, education's very important. They have their lodges of research and so on, and their archives. And it's very important for their members not just to join, but to develop an education within the craft. But you also see in this case, these leaders who were involved in the craft wanted the public to get that education. Moving on with the presidents, Plutarco Elias Calais dramatically increased the funding for rural schools. He set up regulations for schools in towns of over 500 inhabitants. He wanted to bring education to the small towns. Emilio Perez Gil secretly, first of all, he diffused a major university strike by he convened Congress and passed legislation granting autonomy to the National University of Mexico. There would be no suppression of student movements. He did not want that. He wanted these students to have a voice within society as well. And of course, in his case, he secretly negotiated an end to that civil war between the Mexican state and the Roman Catholic Church, reestablished places of worship. Freedom, a very big thing in our lodges today, right? Within fraternalism, that freedom of all members having that voice, as you've heard me say before. Now, moving forward to Adolfo Lopez Mateos, he established the National Commission on Textbooks in 1959. He distributed millions of free mandatory books to primary students to combat illiteracy. Education, as you've heard me say in previous segments on these segments on world leaders and fraternalism, very important, right? And I really think that, much of that must have been learned within the lodge. I really do believe that, right? So, when I look at this, like I said, I see those common threads. Right now, I want to point out that I'm going to leave the accomplishments there because there are so many of them, and I've only encapsulated on the good that these presidents did for Mexico and the great things they did. But there again, I don't know about you, right? Maybe I should ask you, are you as shocked as I was about how involved, the involvement of these men and the level of involvement they had in the craft and the factionalism, of course, within that? That's all one thing on its own, I guess. I keep saying this, we know so much about American leaders and Freemasonry. I don't know why it is we get all this conspiracy type talk about the presidents of the states and their involvement within the craft, but we know so little about. And here you have a country like Mexico with probably almost as many presidents that have been involved in the craft, right, as you would in the States, and yet we don't even know about that, right? Well, now hopefully now you know, right? But I'm going to leave it at that. Before I go, I want to draw your attention to the PayPal link in the details section of this segment. You can hit on that link, make a voluntary donation to this podcast. We will use that to move Points of Light Radio forward. Everything you see here, any content you see, is not sponsor driven. You can follow Points of Light Radio on my Facebook page at facebook.com/Points of Light Radio. My X handle is at PO Light Radio. My Bluesky handle is at polightradio.bsky.social. You can see the link to my Spotify channel, as well as my Points of Light Radio store. Brothers and sisters, until we meet again, just step into the light.